Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Kalanati. Today I'm going to do what is for me a rather rare review of a non-fiction work, which is a biography of Enrico Fermi called The Pope of Physics, Enrico Fermi and the Birth of the Atomic Age by Gino Segrè and Bettina Hoerlin. I had difficulties with this book for two reasons, and they're kind of intertwined. I'm not sure which one to talk about first, but the first one is that large portions of this seemed more like a panegyric and adulation of Fermi as a scientist, a very influential and talented one, rather than a more critical look at his life. The second thing is about Fermi as the subject of a biography about him as a person. So the first one is that I think that most of this book is really about, hey, Fermi was a brilliant genius physicist and we should all acknowledge how great he was. And that's the thing, is sounds like he truly was a very, very talented physicist. But this book says in the afterword, the authors say in the afterword, that they wanted to present Fermi more as a person than any other previous texts may have. And in that case, it started making me think about the author's relationship to Fermi and what he really was like, and how riveting Fermi really is or is not as a subject of a biography, of him as a human being and not just of him as a physicist. So I think the important thing to know about the authors when we're talking about critique versus adoration is that Gino Segrè and Bettina Hoerlin are married, and Segrè is, I think, the nephew or a close relative of Emilio Segrè, who was a scientist, a physicist who was taught by Fermi and who worked with him, and Emilio Segré's name comes up multiple times in this book. So while it may come across as perhaps cynical of me, I can't help but think, as soon as I knew this connection, that the authors might be a little too close to the subject matter of their families being very close and such. And you know, I can't stop thinking about that once I realized the book just felt like it was never going to say much of anything bad about Fermi. And that's the thing, is there something bad to say about Fermi? No, not really, but I feel like they kind of go out of their way to avoid talking about some of the more controversial areas of Fermi's life, especially of him where his role as scientist and human being collide. He worked on the Manhattan Project. It says he's the birth of the atomic age. He was the Pope of Physics. He helped usher in the atomic bomb. He was the linchpin of Los Alamos and Manhattan Project and such. So the issues raised by him working on that project, of him choosing to work on that project to pursue that line of research, a lot of that is very quickly wrapped up near the end of this in just like a paragraph or two of, we're not going to really talk about that, we're just going to acknowledge that it exists. And then this kind of leads me to the next thing, which is Fermi as a person. By all accounts, it sounds like he was very, very devoted to physics, and his personality was not much to write home about. Despite the fact that they've written an entire book about him as a person, you think his personality would play more of a role. But basically it boils down to, he poured all of his friendship and affability into physics and science, his coworkers, his students. And what is left over is a man who seems kind of bland, very emotionally controlled, not expressive about much of anything. He was distant from his family in many ways and much more present physically and emotionally in his work. And that isn't very entertaining to read about. I'm comparing this, of course, with the experience of reading Andrea Wolf's biography of Alexander von Humboldt, which is the only other biography I've read. That's called The Invention of Nature. And part of what made that such a fantastic biography is the subject himself. Humboldt was one of the last truly Renaissance men who had a magnificent personality and had a huge volume of correspondence with his contemporaries, with hundreds of people in the world. And he had a way with words. He was a communicator. And I think the only similarity between Humboldt and Fermi, if I'm going to compare the men, is that they were both known for being mentors of the next generation, of their graciousness and their teaching ability for their students and everything. But there the similarity ends because Fermi doesn't have that sense of a huge personality. After reading The Invention of Nature, I thought Humboldt was a cool guy, like very, very interesting to read about, the kind of person that is literally the life of the party, you know. And Fermi is not. I mean, I think he enjoyed square dancing or whatever it is, which seems to be the most bizarre thing you could ever say about him. But yeah, these two things combined, the approach to the subject matter, that I just didn't think this book dug deep into some of the issues, and that Fermi doesn't seem like an incredibly interesting human being. That made this a kind of boring read sometimes. The book also sometimes, for large stretches of time actually, deviates away from Fermi as the subject, which I can understand why that happens. So you're trying to explain why Fermi is so important as a physicist. You have to give the context, you have to explain the history, the creation of the Manhattan Project, and you know what it was like to be at Los Alamos and everything. But there are large portions of the book where Fermi seems absent because the focus is instead on telling history and the decisions and work of other people, politicians and scientists. But at the end of this, one of the things I just couldn't shake, this disappointment in this book, is a disappointment in Fermi, because I admittedly really think that scientists have a duty to consider the moral, ethical, social, and even political repercussions and effects of their work, of their research. And it seems, this note is hit multiple times in this book, that Fermi worked really hard at remaining apolitical, that he wanted to do science for the sake of doing science. And this pure science only approach really rankled me by the end. And perhaps that's just me with the hindsight that, you know, Fermi and his contemporaries didn't really have of so many examples of scientific research bearing fruit in society in other ways. Of course, we're talking about the atom bomb here and hundreds of thousands of people dying from it. And this moral and ethical issue is brought up, but this is the one thing that I thought should have been gone into in more detail. Clearly, Fermi had a couple of contemporaries who refused to get involved in this line of research and in the Manhattan Project because they did not want to have association with such a destructive thing. They did not want to have that on their conscience. But Fermi was just, you know, like all in to do the thing because it fell in with his line of research and he wanted to find out the answers. And he didn't seem to want to discuss, to really have an opinion on whether it should be done or not. I just don't like that. I really, really don't like that. But anyway, that's The Pope of Physics by Gino Segrè and Bettina Hoerlin. I'm glad I read it because it made me think much more about what a biography is. But I don't think that I left it feeling like I was impassioned to know more about Fermi or to know more about his work or anything. I would much rather go off and read about somebody else who had a more magnetic or larger than life personality. I mean, clearly biographies aren't just written of those types of people, but Fermi was a little bit boring, in my opinion, you know. So we'll see what I pick up next, because I would like to keep reading biographies, but I am way more interested in pursuing some other like female scientists, since I read Women in Science by Rachel Ignatowski, and I think that that will be my reference list for who I want to find biographies of next. That's pretty much it for my ramble about this book. If you've read this, or if you want to talk about Fermi, if you know anything that's I clearly didn't get out of this, please let me know. If you have any recommendations of biographies you think I would really like, given how much I enjoyed The Invention of Nature, please let me know that as well, because I'm very new to this genre, I guess. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye.